Welcome to Mind, Money, Balance, the no guilt, no shame podcast to help you get your mind and money in balance. I'm your host, Lindsay. I'm a financial therapist and coach, woman of color, and popcorn connoisseur. I am so glad you're here. Let's go. Thank you so much, Ed, for coming onto the Mind, Money, Balance podcast, where we are continuing with talking about therapists, about their money stories and how they square their money stories with being a private practice owner. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. And man, I never would have imagined this was the day that I would be having in my life, but I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. Where do you practice? What's your niche?
Yeah, so I am based in Charlotte, North Carolina, South Charlotte to be specific, if you know the area. And I've been practicing for just over 6 years, and I work with couples primarily, and the focus is around couples and money.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So you and I have a very similar niche. I also work with couples and money. And I've shared on the podcast, the reason I pivoted into couples was that as a financial therapist, I was originally seeing individuals, but so many of them were partnered or married that I realized really quickly that I couldn't just see one of them if we were going to do this work. So I'm curious how you got to your niche of working with couples.
Yeah. So I think there's a bigger backstory, right? As a financial therapist, I recognize that now that my past shaped my present. And so I grew up in a family where money wasn't like a huge volatile topic, but it always seemed like there was this subtle discontentment. And I didn't quite understand why. Why is mom upset with dad around the money? And, as a kid, you just kind of like, you couldn't see why there was a problem because at least in our family, my dad did responsible things like fixing up the house. And I didn't understand why his mom so frustrated about like the way he's spending money on that. Well, fast forward, I become a professional firefighter, and I'm sitting around the fire station, and the guys are complaining about two things. Can you guess what those are?
Sex and money.
Yeah, yes. Actually, the funny story on that one is the guys said, once you get married, you can put a marble in the jar for every time you have sex in the first year, and then the rest of your life you will spend taking the marbles out every time you have sex.
Oh my gosh.
What a powerful story to a young, impressionable mind about sex and relationships.
Yeah, no kidding.
I don't know that that's true, and I hope it's not true, but I know it can be for a lot of couples. So anyhow, I wish I had a good anecdote about money, but I think it brings up this very interesting issue around sex and money, which is a whole nother topic. Needless to say, I heard the guys complaining about their wives and money, and I thought, well, I don't want to have this problem. How am I going to solve it? And I set out on the path of becoming a financial planner and went through working at Vanguard Mutual Funds and got my MBA and became a certified financial planner, doing the very traditional thing, thinking if I just know how money works, everything's going to be just fine. I also get married to my wife, who is a dentist and was going to out-earn me as a firefighter. And so I had the brilliant idea, I'll be a financial planner and I'll make lots of money because, that's what they do. Mm-hmm. Got into that field and realized, it's way more complicated than I realized. And you don't just get rich being a financial planner. There's a lot of moving pieces. And so I went back to school to become a therapist, kind of with a combination of a lot of different things and a naive thought that maybe counselors know how to help people. Boy, did I not understand how much therapists know about how people work. So my journey into couples and money has been one out of personal need first. And then second, a realization that many other people struggle with similar issues.
Mm-hmm. I want to kind of tease out something you'd said about going the traditional financial planning route. And that is a belief that I've seen a lot of financial planners and folks in the personal finance space hold, which is if you sort out your money, everything else will be okay. And I heard you kind of say, if I can solve the money problem, I can help my clients be okay otherwise. So tell me, when did you start to realize in that world of financial planning that, it's actually more than the math or more than the numbers?
I wish I could point to a singular point in time, but as a therapist, you also know that it's seldom just one single moment. It's progression of a lot of things. I mean, there was conversations now as a young man with my dad around his small business and what he needed to do. And my mom trying to get me to help coach him. And I would try to coach him and nothing would happen. therapists get trained that you can't help your own family with their stuff, but financial planners don't get that message, but they run into the same dilemma that therapists do. To my own marriage and facing challenges and just talking with clients and realizing there's so much more here. I think I just had a lot of questions about why things are objectively going pretty well for us. Why am I still feeling so insecure? Why do I feel like I say it's okay that my wife makes more than me, and yet I don't feel like it's actually okay for her to make more than me? What's that about? Like, I'm not holding it over my head. So that was a big part of the push into. But then the funny thing is, after I got through the graduate counseling program, I also used lots of denial and minimization about everything I just learned and thought, I'm going to be like this therapist, but mostly do kind of financial conversations with a little bit of therapeutic skill. And those first few years in practice, boy, they were miserable. They were just miserable. I had no idea what I was doing or what I meant by financial therapy. And my poor blessed clients, I hope they're not listening now, but I'm sorry. You had a new therapist. And also just, I had to really start allowing my denial and minimization about psychological realities to come through. And as I listened to more and more clients' stories, I was like, so much of what I've heard in school is true, from issues around incest and to alcoholic parents to emotionally abusive parents. All this stuff is showing up in the office. And I'm like, oh God, what do I do with all this? And so I had to really come out of that identity of being a financial planner with some therapy skills and move into my identity as a therapist. And that was and still is quite an arduous journey.
Okay. So as you moved away from financial planning and into financial therapy and really leaning on the therapy part of being a therapist, how did you shift those money stories, or did you have to shift those money stories? I can only imagine going from what I know about financial planners is, sure, there are some hourly folks, but most people have clients in on a retainer or in an assets under management model. How did you go from that world to private practice? What money stories did you have to sort out to shift gears?
Yeah, that's a huge question. And so I ended up working at Vanguard Mutual Funds, which is a salary-based compensation. And I had
another reason I love Vanguard. I'm not sponsored or affiliated, just throwing it out there.
Yes, I am, as they say, Vanguarded. I index investing and all that fun stuff. But I knew about the AUM model and some of that, right? Which for those that don't know,
assets under management. Great.
And you get a fixed percentage of whatever money you're managing. And so the incentive is the more money you take under management, the more money you make. From a business perspective, brilliant business model. Absolutely brilliant. And I knew, and so some of the internal narratives were like, you're stupid, you're wasting your time, you're missing out on huge financial opportunities by becoming a therapist. You're capping your income potential to the revenue per hour. The only way you can make more money is by increasing how much you charge per hour. It was kind of, I had moved into that, what's good for everybody else mentality, which had always been part of my mentality, even as a planner. And I think that's what part of stopped me from what I considered many of the unethical financial planning practices in the field. Is I just didn't feel right making some of the compensation models that were offered. Just didn't feel right. Felt exploitative or not transparent. But then it's, you're in the therapy world and you're working with a bunch of clinicians who kind of just have accepted their lot in life, that they're not going to be highly compensated or not fairly compensated even. And, I'm coming out and I'm saying, well, I'm going to charge $150 per hour, which is already higher than most clinicians, even senior clinicians in the marketplace. And man, that felt terrible.
Okay. So how did you square, this is what I'm going to charge and this feels terrible?
Well, there was a couple parts, right? One was a functional calculation that the financial planner in me said, okay, well, I think I can reasonably do up to maybe 25 hours of clinical work a week. And so let me back into what would be a reasonable salary, including like 4 to 5 weeks of vacation, covering office overhead and administration and training, and really looking at it as a business. And you start realizing $150 an hour is actually a steal. Because the actual salary that you take home is, I don't even remember what the number was off the top of my head. It's been such a long time, but I think some of it was there was a lot of rationalizing. There was a lot of realizing, like talking with other family members or other people who had undergraduate degrees and were coming out making $90,000 a year plus benefits.
Yep.
And it's like, well, I guess I really shouldn't feel that bad. The hard thing is, when you're consuming IT goods and services, you're not thinking about that person's salary. But when you come get therapy, you're thinking about, all you're thinking about is $150 a session.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to contextualize that for most people, and especially if you've never paid for therapy before, out of pocket.
Yeah.
So, I think I just sat with a lot of the dissonance for a long time until I started having people tell me how much they appreciated what I was doing and how valuable it was. And I had to sit with the reality that people like me from my starting background as a firefighter, where I made $35,000 a year, I wasn't going to be able to serve and reach. Right. And that part of me that's more the social justice, equitable access piece. I know there's a lot of people that make $40,000 to $60,000 a year that would benefit from a highly qualified professional. An internal tension that I wish I could say I'm fully resolved with, and I'm not.
Yeah. And that's another thing with doing financial work and with doing work on your money story, is that so many of my clients want it to be one and done. They want to say, okay, I've checked the boxes. I've looked at my past history. I've looked at my current self, and I'm good to go. But what tends to happen with money is it changes over time. Our relationship with it changes. Our income goes up or down. We move across the country or across the city. Different things change and shift. That then means we have to reconcile with something new. So I find so many of my clients are like, oh, I thought I was done with the money stuff. And my job is to say, like, it's ever evolving. I talk a lot about how we have a relationship with money. We spend it, we save it, we earn it, we lend it, and we are constantly associating meaning to it and value to it. So it's important that we are kind of always keeping it on our minds. It doesn't have to be obsessive in any way, but to just be generous and kind with ourselves, that things will shift over time. And that's a little bit of what I hear you saying, is like, I'm sitting with a new reconciliation and I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think, one of the frameworks that I use is, I really love attachment theory. And so for those that don't know, attachment theory breaks people into 4 categories of securely attached, anxiously attached, avoidantly attached, and disorganized. And secure is kind of the ideal model, right? It's like, I generally feel comfortable with myself and I generally trust other people can know and understand me. So I think about, how would that feel in relationship with money? What would it mean to have a secure relationship with money? And I think it looks something more like, I generally trust myself with money and I generally understand how money benefits me, that there's a nice reciprocal relationship. The anxiously attached person with money is like, never really sure that it's going to be there, always kind of grasping for it, but never really sure that money can actually meet the needs that it can meet appropriately. And so it's people with that anxious style is going to try to get money to do things that it really can't do, like improve your self-worth. But it's also like, never really certain, like, is it okay to have you money? Like, I want you, but I'm not really sure if it's okay. On the avoidant side, it's like, oh, stiff arm, stay away. I don't like you. I can't trust you. I can't trust you to help me meet anything. I'm going to do me, you do you money. And hopefully our paths will never cross. And then, disorganized, which kind of flip back and forth between those patterns. So that's one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about recently, is how we form an attachment with money and how those categories can help give some framework for where are we at on our money journey. Mm-hmm. And I think, to your point, it is kind of a lifetime journey. And if you're on any kind of healing journey, the deeper you get to know yourself, the more complex you realize your relationship is with money and with other people.
Mm-hmm. That's the scary part about therapy, is having to go deep, right? It's like, I mean, I can do a budget, but I have to talk about it now. And I have to talk about what emotions come up when I'm looking at my numbers. That's the scary stuff.
Yeah, that's the scary stuff. And I think, it's like, even when you're on your financial track, you can get caught off guard by what other friends or family members may be accomplishing, that feel ahead of you. Or sometimes you may feel like you're ahead of other family members in negotiating. What does that really mean? Wow, my friends just bought a lake house. Oh, that's what I want to accomplish, right? And that deflation, how do you deal with that when you're like, well, they're on a different money journey than I am? to like, how do I deal well with like, well, we're doing really well, but this other family member is struggling with money. What's my role to them? And so, the right type of relational and financial boundaries are very important as well.
Super quick announcement. This is Lindsay. Duh. I wanted to let you know that if you are a private practice therapist who is in the process of filling up their practice with clients, but you're struggling with how to set fees and how to think about your money in a holistic way so that you can cultivate a sustainable practice, I am thrilled to let you know that Grow a Profitable Practice from the Inside Out, my 9-week group coaching program for private practice therapists, will be reopening its doors very soon. We are not ready quite yet, so what I want you to do if you're interested is go to www.mindmoneybalance.com/profitable practice, all one word, and make sure to put your name on the wait list so you will get notified just as soon as those doors open. Again, that's mindmoneybalance.com/profitable practice. Yeah. So I'm curious if you've had any pushback on the way that you run your practice, the fees that you charge from other people in the field, because again, so much of the money stories we get as clinicians is that we didn't choose this field to make money. So it can be really hard to push back against that in a way that is in alignment with our values, but also provides us with a sustainable lifestyle. So did you have any of those moments where you got pushback from within?
Within the field?
Yeah, within the field. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because it's been a little while. I feel like it came up more as I was establishing myself.
Mm-hmm.
And now as I'm more established, I'm not doing as much networking where the fee question comes up. And I have close allies in the field that are also private practice clinicians that are charging appropriate rates for their services. And so, yeah, it's fortunately become much less of an issue now. But I think certainly, as I was saying earlier, like being the new guy on the block and charging a higher than normal rate felt weird.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like, I also realized from a business perspective, my target audience were business professionals and doctors and attorneys. And so they're used to certain hourly rates. And I had to realize, like, if I'm charging too low a rate, they're going to wonder, does this guy even really value what he's offering?
Right. It's an interesting space that we are in. And I find so many therapists when they are starting out in their journey, maybe not so many, I'll speak to myself. When I was starting out, I kind of scoured Psychology Today, looked at other private practice therapists' fees, and I kind of picked something on the middle to low end because I wanted to show people like, I'm not cheap, but I'm not like out of reach. I'm that Goldilocks fee, but it had nothing to do with what I was offering, what my expertise was, or what my needs were. And one thing that you're saying again and again that I hope the listeners are picking up on is you keep saying an appropriate fee. Why that language?
Well, because I think context matters.
Yes.
If you want to work with people that are in poverty, then being a private practice clinician is probably not the right route for you. And that's a hard reality you have to sit with, but that's the structure of the system. And unless you want to get into systemic change, you're going to have to sit with that. If you're working with a family, households that make between $40,000 and $60,000 a year, you're probably not going to be able to charge $175 an hour and have a lot of them stick or any kind of long-term therapy. Some might, and some might really figure out how to pull that together. But this is the financial planner in me, is you look at a percentage of budget, and if your fee is over 10% of their monthly income, they're going to have a hard time figuring that out.
Mm-hmm.
And I do also think that you get into questions of ethical violation. I think it can become, this is where like high fee setting is appropriate in some contexts, but becomes unethical in other contexts. Mm-hmm. So if you have a family that you're creating more financial strain for them, even if your service is highly valuable, I think you got to look at the ethics of that. But when you start getting into household incomes of $100,000 plus a year, and we're talking about $600 a month, is that going to be easy for them? Not always, but can they figure it out and have it not become a financial burden? Yes. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where the ethics of price setting can really be important. And you can sit with, is it right with me? So that's where, I think a lot of private practice clinicians will offer a sliding scale for those clients that come in. Now, the interesting thing is when you set your fee at that higher end, and then you get the client that fits well and they're making $40,000 a year, now you have to have a hard conversation about the sliding scale, because you saying, well, sliding my scale down can feel disempowering to them or disingenuous. And so how do you develop language around that so that they don't feel minimized for not being able to pay the full fee, and they don't feel like you're shortchanging yourself?
Right. And I was just talking to somebody else about this sliding scale, how so many clinicians who have that sliding scale, it's one of the first things that kind of comes out of their mouth. They say, my fee is 175, but I have a sliding scale that slides down to 50. Right. It's one of the first things, then rather than just saying my fee is 175 and pausing and waiting to see if somebody says, that isn't going to work for me, but I really want to work with you. Can we work something out? And to your point, it's also putting a lot of assumptions on this person who's calling you about what they can and can't afford, and about what they do and don't value. They may be more than happy to trim back spending in an area to really go all in on therapeutic work for a handful of months. And who are we to say, like, no, you couldn't possibly afford me? And to your point, it's not about putting them in ethical hardship, but it's also about us not assuming what we know is best for the client.
Yeah. And we never know people's full financial picture when they call in. And I think we can lose sight of that still. If they really need it, there's often someone in the family system that can support.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll lean on that family member if they need to. I've had multiple clients that could not individually afford it, but could reach out to their family system and get the additional support. So, and that's where I think, and your point about pausing, right? All of that stuff is pretty classic sales material.
Oh, interesting. Right. Mm-hmm. And I just think of it as the therapeutic pause.
In the sales world, they teach you to state your price unambiguously and then be quiet and wait for the reaction, because it is a mind reading and guessing otherwise. And I think it's interesting because I said, well, my fee was 150, or that's why I started. And then you just use the example of 175. And talking about being on my own journey with money is, I was on a family vacation recently with some family friends I hadn't seen in years. And the husband was asking me, well, how are things going for you and everything? I said, oh, it's going pretty good. I've grown a lot. I've learned so much. And then he was talking about his career path. And he said, yeah, one of the biggest challenges I've had is I've had to learn how to ask for an appropriate fee for my services in a completely unrelated discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they had joined a larger firm, and so they were working with him on that. And I said, it's interesting. I have the same dilemma. I said, I haven't upped my fee in, 6 years. I started out. And he said, well, what's that about for you? I was like, what are you doing? Are you therapizing me? You can't therapize a therapist.
Right.
But we talked about it a little bit more, and I said, oh, I went into that old money story of I'm undeserving. It's not okay to ask for money. I said, well, I'm kind of thinking about 175, and all sheepish. And he said, why wouldn't you charge $200 an hour? I was like, it just blew that money ceiling in my head, because it's like, well, that's too big of a step to go $50 an hour.
Right.
And, sorry for all the clients out there listening, or prospective clients, but this is the inner workings of our mind.
Yeah, of course.
The reality is new clients have no idea what my old fee schedule was.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's $200 an hour, and clients are getting enrolled at that price. And yeah, there's still some that, either directly or indirectly signal that that's too much. And I say, that's okay, no problem. Here are other options that they ask. And some that say, okay, great, let's go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so interesting to just watch how that all works of, nope, this is as high as I could possibly charge. And one thing that I share with other private practice owners is, if you are not raising your rates annually at least 3%, you're basically giving yourself a pay cut, because we have to at least keep up with inflation. So whether that means you raise your rates a bigger jump every other year, or whether you give yourself, incremental pay raises throughout the year, that's up to you. But we also have to consider that if you're not increasing your fee as time goes on, you're actually giving yourself a pay cut year after year.
Yeah, that reminds me of a great story. And this is the money message within the therapy community is an intern site location I was at. They boasted, wow, actually, you might be providing me a therapy moment here.
Oh, great. My pleasure.
But I was full of piss and vinegar here. I was this bright MBA, CFP. I'm going to take over the therapy world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm at my intern location site talking about this stuff. They liked that I had that background. And they said, well, we've probably not raised our fees in like 10 years. And there was other money issues there, but I'll just leave it at that. And it was like this source of, and that splinters out into a much bigger cultural milieu question of like, why is it that we prize low prices all the time? Mm. And how does that end up playing into, I'm going to open a huge can of worms and then slam it back shut, but how does that systemic poverty, right? How does that play into that story or narrative of always looking for the lowest price, keep people stuck in poverty on both sides of the provider and the seeker? So that's a whole nother question, much bigger than what we can deal with now. But
Yeah. So as we get close to wrapping up the podcast, the final question I like to ask my therapy friends is, what is your one favorite thing about being in private practice?
Oh,
I know therapists don't like this because we don't like to just have one answer.
Yeah. No, everything's so gray and multifaceted for us. I will tell you right now, what I'm enjoying most is creativity. So I'm working on a book called The 4 Love Languages of Money.
Beautiful.
Attachment framework. And I'm hoping to have that out in early 2020. And so it's nice to be at the point where my private practice has grown to a very sustainable and profitable place. And this is something I think that's also really big is, and I see that you're doing it, I think is, you've got your private practice up and going, and now you're going out to the next layers of challenge financially and looking at how do I earn multiple streams of revenue to increase my income. And I presume you're able to use hopefully some of the healthy revenue that you're producing to fund that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm grateful to be at that place too, where I can use a portion of the money that I'm earning to reinvest in the business and grow my business to create online courses, publish books, take time off to work on those projects that are going to fund my future self, which I think I saw in one of your blog posts that I love that exercise of working on the future self. So
yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, Ed, this was such a fun conversation, and there are so few of us financial therapists in the US right now. I'm hopeful that there will be more and more of us as time goes on. But one other thing that I just want to use kind of this interview as an example for all my private practice therapists out there is that you can niche down and be incredibly successful, and there's more than enough room for multiple people to be working within a specific niche. And I don't see other financial therapists as threats in any way, shape, or form. We all have our unique nuances that we bring into the therapeutic space. We all have the different modalities we like to lean on. So I hope for my listeners who are like worried about niching down because someone else in the city or someone else in your state does the same thing, there's more than enough room for all of us. So I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing your wisdom and in your story. I know it can be hard when the tables are flipped and you're the one answering questions instead of asking. So I really appreciate your generosity today.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, Lindsay. It's been a pleasure being interviewed by you. And I hope that maybe there'll be future opportunities to do another interview.
Yeah. Takeaways from today's episode with Ed are: number one, reframing thoughts in a way that work for you and dialing down the importance of other people's opinions. And so I know that's kind of a mouthful, but what I took from something that Ed said about kind of this external noise about charging for his particular services was, instead of thinking about something that he'd heard when he was in the financial planning services and thinking, oh my gosh, you're capping your revenue, you're missing out on more money, or thinking about things that he'd heard from therapy friends about you can't charge that much or people won't be able to afford it, he instead tuned in to what was important to him and reframed things about how he set his fees by saying things like, what I'm doing is valuable, and charging this and going into private practice means I can serve and reach additional clients. So I really value his ability to reframe some external noise to work for him. And that's something that you can do in your relationship with money, whether you're a private practice owner or entrepreneur or not. Dialing down the importance of other people's noise who don't know your story, right? Tip number 2 is the reality that our relationship with money is a lifetime thing. Ed was able to put into words how he has seen his relationship with money and using an attachment styles framework to be really helpful. And he's been able to pinpoint, these are the times when I'm feeling really avoidant with my money and I want to run away from it. And these are the times where I'm feeling an unhealthy attachment to it. And here's the times when I'm able to find a healthy attachment to it. So thinking about the ways in which we can cultivate a healthy relationship with money and being gentle enough with ourselves to know that it's bound to change over time depending on what's going on in our lives. And then the final takeaway is the importance of reinvesting to fund your future self. Now, he talked about this within the context of his therapy business of saying, look, I'm full and now I'm ready to grow and do more things. But I also think it's worthwhile to apply this tip to yourself about what's important for you to reinvest in. And you can take this literally in terms of which index funds are performing well and which ones do you want to continue to reinvest in. Or you could take this a little bit more figuratively to say, what are the things that I'm doing for my mental health, my emotional health, and my physical health that are doing really well, and I want to continue to reinvest in those things. So those are the 3 tips / takeaways from today's episode with Ed. As always, make sure you are subscribed to this podcast so you don't miss any episodes when they drop on Mondays. And if you enjoyed this, please take a screenshot, share it out on Instagram, and tag me at MindMoneyBalance. Sharing is caring, and that is how we get the message out about cultivating a healthy relationship with our minds and our money. Take care. Have you requested access to my private Instagram community at Mind Money Community? Learn from and connect with others in similar situations as we talk about what we've done to keep our relationships alive and thriving. On Mondays, I share money tips. Thursdays, I go live answering your questions, and Fridays are reserved for fun. Hope to see you there at Mind Money Community. Neither the host or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, medical, or other professional information. If you want professional help, please seek it out.